There is a new movie, a new Pixar movie called Soul. And you definitely know that if you're subscribed to this channel because I've decided that I'm just going to make Soul videos every day for who knows how long, honestly. Uh, I didn't set out for that to be the case, but the thing is, it's the new Pixar movie. I got to talk about it. And I was looking at topics for today's stream. There was a bunch of really good contenders, and I have some big topics that I do want to get to over the next week or two or three. But it is New Year's Day. Happy New Year, everybody. And I don't want to, use this time unwisely. I don't want to. I know a lot of you are probably hanging with family. If maybe you're bored at home and so you're watching the stream, I hope you're having an amazing holiday, no matter where you are. Hey Juanes, it's good to see you in the chat. I'm doing fantastic. I went to bed at about 4 a.m., which, as you can imagine, my day has been fantastic as a result. But like I said, I'm here to talk about things. Actually, my space heater is still on. Let me turn that off. It is a little cold out here in the Bay Area, uncharacteristically. What was I saying? Yeah, Soul. I'm doing Soul videos again and again. I understand you're probably tired of it. I'm not. Mainly because we're talking about something that I wasn't sure if we were going to find this out. I wasn't sure if we were actually going to get concrete information on some of the decisions in Soul's ending, actually this early when the film came out. But it does make sense because, first of all, this is not the first time Pixar has, or Pete Docter for that matter, has gone on the record explaining why they've done the ending that they've done. This is kind of a typical thing, actually. If you watch the movie Up, there is a special features where they actually talk about it. They go in depth on why Up ends the way that it ends. So I'm not going to give it away because, maybe some of you haven't seen Up, and I don't want to go to the trouble of putting up a spoiler warning. But needless to say, the way that things happen in Up, you might not even remember, but the way the climax unfolds is very, very specific because unlike a lot of other high-profile spectacle movies that come to the public, Pixar ones, they do have to have some sensitivity to family audiences. They do have to sort of like walk on eggshells a little bit because they know that a lot of little kids are going to be watching them. They, have to reasonably expect that their movies are supposed to be for all ages. Now, that sounds probably funny to some of you, considering that Soul is not exactly, how should I put this, the most kid-friendly film thematically. It is a film that is brimming with some serious subject matter. And that's kind of what gets into the reveal here, that Soul actually had a darker ending than what we got. So at this point, I'm going to have to pop up the old spoilers for Soul. Hopefully this will help steer away anybody who comes into this stream, maybe by accident or something, I don't know, and doesn't realize that spoilers are going to happen, but they are. Like I said before, we got some information from Pete Docter at Pixar, the director of Pixar Soul, that as it happens, the movie had a different ending. And in fact, the ending of this film was going to be very, very different. One of the chief criticisms for Soul that I have come across, and one that I actually do understand and kind of was wrestling with myself toward the end of this film, it's the fact that Joe Gardner, our main character, actually gets a second chance at life. And there are some folks who have looked at that ending, and I'll go into more detail, of course. They've looked at this ending as a little bit of a cop-out, that Joe Gardner, he shouldn't get a second chance. I mean, it would make more sense if he became like a mentor in the youth seminar. It would make more sense if like there were consequences for his sacrifice to 22, because that is what he decides to do. He decides that he is not going to go back to Earth, but instead rescue 22 and allow 22 to go to Earth and live a life. And there is a thematic like resonance to that type of ending, and as it happens, that actually is the ending that they were going to go with. So I'm going to go to this article here on Insider. I have the cache version, so the connection isn't annoying. But this is from Jason Gracio. There's a lot of reporting on this, but this article came at us from Insider.com. The director of Soul says that initially the movie had a completely different ending. So we're going to have to breeze past here. If you've watched Pixar's new movie Soul on Disney Plus, you probably got a little choked up at the end when Joe Gardner's journey to the great beyond ends with him being given a second chance at life back on Earth. In the film, the middle school band teacher dies after falling accidentally into a manhole. It didn't help that it happened just as he received the opportunity of a lifetime. You already know the plot synopsis, so we don't have to go over that. But as it happens, so Pete Docter, director of Soul, co-director Ken Powers, and producer Dana Murray, longtime producer of Pixar, told Entertainment Tonight that the second chance Joe receives wasn't always the planned ending. So this is a quote from Dana Murray, the producer of Soul. There was a lot of debating back and forth, Murray said, but I think the more we saw him live his life and just thinking about his mother Libba and all these different factors, it felt like the right ending, that he needed to be able to go enjoy his life in the way he wanted to because he'd learned so much throughout the film. So this take on the ending is how I took it. I took it as, well, you have to end the film with him getting the second chance because it's kind of what they've been setting up, in my opinion. I think that they are setting it up that he learns how to live life better, and it wouldn't be as satisfying to the audience, it wouldn't be as satisfying to the story if Joe had just died. I think that's the main point, right? And I agree with that because that is kind of the movie that it's the same thing if you looked at Christmas Carol, and I know I brought this up the other day. Christmas Carol, imagine if Scrooge had, like, I don't know, died or something, or hadn't been given the chance to reconnect with the community and take what he learned and put it into practice. That would make that story really bleak. It would make that story not as resonant and not as hopeful, and that wouldn't work for the story because that story kind of by definition needs to be uplifting in a sense, right? So Powers added, that ending sparked more debate than I think any other element of the film. In fact, as different scenarios were developed, some in which Joe stayed dead, others in which he does get a second chance at life, and another ending in which we see Joe's life a year later. Docter said people in the movie began to build allegiance to the ending in which they believed. This is very typical of Pixar. They are fierce storytellers. They fight for the story. If you've seen any sort of like dailies when they're going, the subtle things too, like with animation and how they decide like certain expressions. One of the reasons Pixar films feel so considered and they feel so different from a lot of other movies is because Pixar spends years and years on them, and they really don't cut corners when it comes to considering every detail. And one of those things, as you can imagine, is the script. When a Pixar film is in trouble, they tend to bring in other creative teams to try to revamp the whole thing. And that actually happened with this movie. They brought in Kent Powers a few years into production because they were feeling like the Joe character just wasn't working. They were feeling like there was a lot missing from the film. So this is no big surprise that there were a bunch of endings considered. In fact, I was a little confused when I saw some of the reviews and some of the criticisms for Soul coming out saying like, oh, how could they have not have thought of this? Or how could they have not done this ending? And my reaction was, well, I'm sure they did. I'm sure that they had like 5 or 6 like favorite endings or favorite like within the studio that they were considering, and the one that we got won out for a reason, whether or not you agree or disagree with that reason. So okay, Docter says there were definitely camps because I think people felt like it's cheating to let him go back. On the other hand, story-wise, you can't teach this guy to enjoy life the right way and then rob him of that. So these are the two things, and Pixar can't sort of like win no matter what. I think that there is going to be a problem no matter what ending they go with. If they go with the ending that we got, people are going to say it feels like cheating to let him go back. It's going to be the Frozen 2 problem. Spoilers for Frozen 2. That film ends very similarly to Soul, where a character gives up something very precious to them, but then they get it eventually anyway. In fact, the first Frozen, it's kind of like that too, a little bit. On the other hand, story-wise, you can't teach this guy to enjoy life the right way and then rob him of that. And that's where I stand. You can't have this movie where Joe is sort of like looking at his life more objectively from a bird's eye view and seeing what he was missing out on and seeing that he wasn't appreciating the time he had. So for me, the way we do get the ending is actually a lot better, because then Joe is like able to go back and we don't see what happens next. We just know that he's going into life with any perspective or with any sort of like ambition that he decides that he wants. And I actually, that's what I love the most about the ending of Soul, is that we don't spend time with him after the fact and we don't have him just go to be a mentor. I think that that would have been unfulfilling, honestly, if he had just gone to the great beyond and that's it. I mean, I don't know. To me, that is just not the kind of ending that feels very Pixar to me. And I know some people will disagree with that. So going on, the ending in the final version of Soul finds Joe heading up the stairs to the great beyond after helping 22 find the spark to begin their life on Earth. But on his incline, one of the Jerrys, or the keepers of the universe and all of its secrets, stops him and reveals that they have decided to allow him another chance at this life, which he happily accepts. Docter added that in the original script, he felt the correct ending was to have Joe move on, calling it the most selfless act. While making the movie, however, he had a change of heart. I'm not that surprised by this, that Docter initially was in the camp of let Joe die. That's just kind of, but not because there's something wrong or like he has ill feelings toward the Joe character or anything like that. But for this story, I'm sure that in an earlier version, it did feel fitting for Joe's sacrifice to really go all of the way. And what I mean by that is, like, kind of like I said before, like it would feel a little bit, it does feel a little bit like cheating. It does feel a little bit like him getting this second chance sort of undermines the sacrifice he made. And that is a criticism that I totally understand. Docter added, did I read this? Yeah. Ultimately, in the movie, every scene was Joe going, wait a second, I didn't live this the right way before, Docter said. So it didn't seem right then at the end to go, all right, off you go. It led to the final shot of the movie of Joe back in his body, taking a deep breath as he sets off on his new life. That is how I feel, honestly, when Joe is given that second chance, is that we're sort of like launching him into a future that is more unknown. I guess compare this. Imagine that Soul ended the way that it was originally supposed to end. The darker ending is that Joe goes to the great beyond, and we don't know what happens to him. And I do think that is a darker ending. It's not darker in the sense that it's bleaker, but it is darker in the sense that Joe going to the great beyond, first of all, we don't know what happens to him. We don't know if he's going to be happy. We don't know if he is going to be regretful or continue to be regretful, because he's just learned this lesson that he didn't appreciate everything. And instead of going back to try to appreciate things, he is going into a new stage where it could, for all we know, it could be nothing. And that's an ending, like I said before, it doesn't feel as satisfying. It feels kind of existentially dark. And I really like that they went back on this. And I understand that you do have to trade something. Screenwriting 101 is that every story decision has a trade-off. When you solve one problem in a script, you have the potential to create a totally new one. And that happens all the time in films. And when you're analyzing a film and you're trying to recognize its objective qualities and what's good about it and what's bad about it, it's always important to keep that into perspective. It's always important to remember that the screenwriters make choices for a reason, and almost always there is a trade-off that does make some valid sense, even if you believe it's not the right decision overall. It's important to at least recognize that these trade-offs exist. So I don't know that we specified too much, but the roles were flipped. Previously, Docter told Insider that initially most of Soul was spent in the Great Before, where Joe ends up after escaping from entering the Great Beyond at the beginning of the movie, and didn't always star a black lead. I don't know that we specified too much, but the roles were flipped. 22 was the lead, this character who doesn't want to go be born, he continued. I am so glad that they changed this, by the way, because the whole thing of like 22 doesn't want to be born, that's an interesting idea, but I think what we have with Joe is a lot more original. This idea of somebody who like dies unexpectedly and is in middle age, it's a perspective that we don't get very often, like a middle-aged black man who is forced to sort of like re-encounter, his life and try to like make decisions about what ultimately makes him happy. That to me is a lot more interesting than like a soul who hasn't been born yet and doesn't want to live. And it's like, we're all humans, so we're just kind of like, it's a little harder for people like us to connect with a character like we have been born. Like, come on, join the party. Once Joe became the protagonist, the directors decided to add more elements to his life and presumably change the ending. This actually makes a lot of sense, that the original ending had him like moving on, because if that wasn't the lesson he was learning in the first part of this movie, if it really was 22 being the sole lead, or being the main lead at least, not trying to be like punny there. If that really was the case, if that really was what they were going for, then it would actually make sense for Joe to sort of be like, oh, my life wasn't meaningless. I led a good life and everything. And so it's okay for me to move on. And that's probably what they had in mind with this darker ending. But by switching to like us being more in Joe's shoes, I could totally see how Pixar's screenwriters, how Docter and Powers would be like, well, actually, wait, this character, is our Ebenezer Scrooge. This character deserves that second chance to go back. That's going to be a better ending. Kemp, who initially joined the film as a writer, added that Joe's character needed a lot of fleshing out, especially once they decided that he'd be a black man. For me, it's definitely about the context in which you tell this character's story. There are a lot of caution cones we had to put up to, for the first time, tell a black man's story in an animated film, being aware of how easy it is to go off the rails. Powers, who identifies as black, added, "The point of the film is that everyone has a soul," he continued. "All of our souls are presented in the same way, in the same color." I have been thinking a lot about the ending of Soul and whether or not it fully works. I have had that thought of like, why don't we get to see more of Joe after, like a year later, which was mentioned in this article. And ultimately, I lean toward the ending that we got probably being the better one. We can't know for sure, but even though there was a part of me that kind of wanted to see Joe, moving on and or see what Joe's life would be like later on in the film, I think that would have been cool. I think that would have been fun and interesting. But I do like that there is ambiguity to it. I do like the film ends on it doesn't really matter what Joe does next. It's almost like if you had shown Joe being, for example, like a professional jazz musician or this inspiring music teacher a year later, and like his students are loving music as much as he does or whatever. I think if you had gone with that kind of ending, it almost sort of could undermine the message of it doesn't matter what he does. The point is that like when he is in that diner, like in the my life is meaningless scene, he is making the most of life. He's not looking at what he's done and feeling like it was all meaningless, because he does have these relationships. He does have, a strong relationship with his mother. He does have this student who idolizes him and admires him. Two students, in fact. And I think that we don't need it. It's an unnecessary thing. And I really like that the film, first of all, is short. And it allows us to just stop on that note of like Joe looking up, seeing the potential before him, and just being fascinated by all of the opportunities in front of him, no matter what they are. There is a heavy criticism toward this film, and I talked about this last week when I was going over some of the critical reaction. People saying that this film is like anti-dreams. People are claiming that Soul is trying to say, hey, don't dream for anything, or don't bother dreaming, just appreciate things as they are, conserve the status quo. And I don't think that that's true. I really don't. I really don't think that is what the film is actually saying. The film, from my perspective, what I see it saying is that, yes, dream, have a dream and go for it. But if you don't get it, if you don't get exactly what you want, first of all, you're not entitled to it. And life is full of curveballs, and you need to be flexible, and you need to adapt to what life throws your way, so that if other opportunities come, you can have new dreams that can coincide with your original one. You can have more than one dream at one time. I know for me, when I graduated college, man, almost a decade ago, I was looking at what I could do with my life. And to be honest, I'm the kind of person where I didn't have a lot of dreams. I already had this sort of predisposition toward sort of going with whatever life throws my way. And I'm fortunate to have that. It's kind of how I was raised, I guess. My family has always been very opportunist. It's always been like, we're going to go here, we're going to try this, and if it doesn't work out, that's okay. It's a really strong quality of my family and the way my upbringing in particular. But I have come across a lot of people I love and trust, and a lot of friends who get so hung up and they get so obsessed with their dream, the one thing that they want to do. They think that is the one thing that will make them happy. But it turns out, and I really believe this, no one thing is going to make you happy. It really isn't. If you're somebody who is watching this video and you're thinking to yourself, if I could be John, I would be super happy. If I could have written the Pixar theory, something that went viral, something that millions of people read, I would be happy. No, those things don't make you happy, because those things on their own are ultimately meaningless by themselves. The things that make those things better is the people and the experiences that come around them. It's the people that I get to talk to about Pixar. It's the connections I get to make because of my passion for these videos, because of my dream and how it puts me into contact with other people. Those are the things that are fulfilling. And if I bring this all back to say that if Soul had ended differently, I think that message would have been lost. I think that message would have been a little bit more confusing and a little bit more muddled. And so, in my opinion, I think that Doctor and Powers and Dana Murray and all of them, they saved this film. They saved it from being lesser than what I think it ultimately ended up being. So that is my take on the darker ending of Soul, and I hope you enjoyed my covering of it. I hope it's I don't know. I just hope that this film clicks with more people. And if you find yourself disagreeing, totally valid. I totally understand some of the disagreements that can come from this. All I ask is that you come at it with an open mind. Maybe rewatch the film down the road and consider what I've said. And then, I'm not saying you'll change your mind, of course, but if you happen to find yourself thinking deep about the film, hopefully you will consider the ending about as good as I did. I hope that is the case. That is everything I have for this video. I really appreciate you watching. Don't forget, if you want to follow me and know when I'm going live, I try to do a little bit longer of a window of time here so that I give you like an hour, knowing that I was going to go live. Hopefully that was helpful for people. If not, let me know. Let me know if you have any feedback on the stream, any audio problems like that. I'm still working hard to address all of those. I didn't see any questions in the chat, so I'm going to call it there. But thank you, everybody. I hope you have a fantastic rest of your holiday. And I promise I'm going to do more videos that are not about Soul necessarily. I mean, I might, if you guys have probably kind of figured out about me, I have quite a passion for Pixar. So that actually might be the case. I'll be talking about Soul plenty more times in the coming weeks and beyond, infinity and beyond. All right. See everybody. Have a fantastic rest of your New Year's.